The Ullapool Caber is a bad weapon. That is, if you use it incorrectly. What you just witnessed is Caberknight, a playstyle for Demo Knight where you trade in your usual sword for a stick grenade that the Demo Man swings around as a melee weapon. But before you learn how to Caberknight like the best, let's go over the basics. The Ullapool Caber is a melee weapon for Demo Man that causes an explosion on the first hit and does less damage with subsequent hits until you either die and respawn or touch a resupply cabinet. The exact number for the first swing are a little complicated, so we'll go over them in a bit. But the Broken Caber does 55 damage normally and 165 damage on a crit. The weapon also has a 20% slower swing speed, which makes comboing the explosion to a second hit a bit harder but still doable. The final two stats listed are no random critical hits and a 100% deploy speed penalty. The former of which doesn't matter unless you play casual, and the latter doesn't matter since we run boots in this house. So, damage. The Caber's explosion has a base damage of 75, which, combined with the 55 damage from the melee hit itself, should give you 130 damage, right? Unfortunately for all you light class one-shotting enjoyers out there, the most you will be doing with the Caber is around 120, due to damage ramp up. In the same update that nerfed the sniper terrorizing Caber of old's damage down from 100, Valve also changed the Caber's ramp up to work the same as other explosive weapons. I don't really understand what that means, but it affected the Caber horribly, because now it cannot one-tap that oblivious sniper. That is, unless you engage in the arcane Caberknight technique known as crouching before you swing. Due to how ramp up is calculated, hitting your opponent in the ankles will make the explosion deal more damage. In my experience, this changes the range from about 115 to 122 to around 123 to 128, which still doesn't reach base damage somehow, but does allow you to send a scout that gets a bit too close back to resupply. Now that we know how to send light classes to hell in a pinch,
I'm burning!
Let's talk about those juicy crits. Before we begin, it's important to note that the Caber cannot mini-crit off a charge, only full crit. I'm unsure if this is a bug or intentional by the devs, but it's a fact of life when it comes to Caberknights, so get used to it. According to the wiki, a crit explosion deals 390 damage at base, but as we went over, we will never be doing base damage, so what are the real numbers? Your average 118 damage Caber will be dealing a 354 damage crit, enough to turn all but an overhealed heavy into Gibbs. The splash damage from said explosion should also be enough to vaporize anyone unfortunate enough to be next to your victim. Let's say for convenience that it's around 200 on average, cause actually calculating it seems like a hassle. So, that's a lot of multi-kill potentials in places where enemies like to bunch up, and even in places they don't. Stat time is over, now let's look at loadout choice. I personally use the Charge and Targe as I found the survivability helps me get into position easier. The Splendid Screen's increased shield bash damage can help you kill easier with non-crit Cabers, but it also has a tendency to send enemies flying, and without the extended range of a sword, your Caber will just miss. So be careful of that. Just don't use the Tide Turner. No mini-crits, remember? And finally, please for the love of God, just commit to full Caberknight and run boots. I won't be touching on grenade launchers, because I believe the turning control, added health, and move speed of the boots are vital to Caberknight's kit. Technique time. Blind charge around corners. Control point? Charge around a nearby corner. Payload cart? You better find a corner. Choke point? You best believe those have corners. Any corner you think an enemy might be behind, just charge around it and hit them with your tactical nuke. When you aren't simply blindly charging into the enemy, you can employ advanced strats like charging in the air to travel more distance and nab a stylish med pick, charging straight at a sniper while wiggling your mouse to make your head harder to hit, DPS racing a heavy. It's like a 50-50 chance you win, and 90% of gamblers lose just before they're about to hit it big. Joking aside, there are some advanced things you can do with the Caber, such as Caber jumping. Like any explosive in TF2, the Ullapool Caber can be used to explosive jump. The Caber is unique in that it always sends you straight up, however. This one-time use vertical mobility can lead to some incredibly funny scenarios given the correct setup. Take this spot on Swiftwater, for example. Remember that a broken Caber crit is still enough to one-shot a medic, and a shield bash into a crit can kill demos, pyros, and possibly even soldiers if you put your mind to it. Another technique you can utilize is the Extender, a bugged mechanic that allows Demo Knight to increase his melee range to 128 hammer units instead of the usual 48, or 72 with a sword. Simply swing just before charging and that swing will have the increased range, but keep in mind that the swing will only do normal damage. The Extender is incredibly niche with a normal sword or body, but with the Caber I found it becomes significantly less niche. Enemies can usually react to a Caber Knight charging at them, but a Caber Knight that hits them before the charge even starts? Not as easy. Also worth mentioning, you score infinite style points for pulling out your spaghetti code knowledge in the DM. One final thing. Never underestimate the power of the broken Caber. 55 damage is only 10 less than normal. Become a master of those stressful melee 1v1s, and come out on top with your weaker, slower weapon. Laugh at your enemy's corpse after they are bested by your superior knowledge of hit reg, and just general swag. Decide not to bother returning to resupply to refresh your Caber, and charge at the enemy medic with a 165 crit and a dream. That last one is legit a valid strat for dealing with pesky vaccinator medics who know how to panic pop explosive resistance.
I am meditating!
Summary for this section. Broken Caber is good, just learn its weaknesses and surpass them. Hey y'all, Editing L here, giving some final thoughts on the Caber before my conclusion. First of all, damage numbers. Elsewhere on the wiki, not on the main Caber page, it lists the combined damage as 110, which is not how the math works, but does make more sense for damage ramp up. So I'm hoping that this video inspires somebody more dedicated to testing than I am to like actually figure out how much damage the Caber can and will do. So yeah, that would be nice. And some other thoughts. Always be crouching. C-tapping your Cabers is really funny. And speaking of funny, here is a collection of some extra funny clips that I'll show you before the conclusion.
I think we're doing great, boys.
Bed down.
Oh my god, you went so high.
Yeah.
The missile knows where it is at all.
Summary for this video. Caber Knight is a high-risk, high-reward playstyle that utilizes a weapon that has been overlooked in the past to its full potential. I genuinely believe the Caber to be a viable option when it comes to playing Demo Knight, just for the sheer destructive potential it holds. If you agree with me, or just want to be a little bit silly with it, I hope you take up your high-yield Scottish face removal and join me in terrorizing medics and snipers the world over. Thanks for watching, and happy Caberknighting.